Good day. This is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you for Reason to Resist from Montreal, Canada on December 11th, 2024. In August of last year, the Intercept reported that it had obtained a classified Pakistani government document. The document revealed that in a meeting held on March 7th, 2022, the U.S. State Department had pressured the Pakistani government to remove Imran Khan as Pakistan's prime minister over his neutrality on the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The document, labeled secret, includes an account of the meeting between State Department officials, including Assistant Secretary of State for the Bureau of South and Central Asian Affairs, Donald Liu, and Asad Majeed Khan, who at the time was Pakistan's ambassador to the U.S. The diplomatic meeting came 2 weeks after the Russian invasion, which launched as Khan was en route to Moscow, a visit that infuriated Washington. 1 month after the March 7, 2022 meeting, a no-confidence vote was held in Pakistan's parliament, leading to Khan's removal from power. The vote is believed to have been organized with the backing of Pakistan's powerful military. Pakistan's position on the Ukraine war was quickly reversed after Imran Khan's removal, which was followed, as promised in the meeting, by a warming between the U.S. and Pakistani relations. Since Khan's removal from power, Khan and his supporters have been engaged in a struggle with the military and its civilian allies, whom Khan claims engineered his removal from power at the request of the U.S. The political struggle escalated on August 5, 2023, when Khan was sentenced to 3 years in prison on corruption charges and taken into custody for the second time since his ouster. Khan's defenders dismissed the charges as baseless. The sentence also blocked Khan, Pakistan's most popular politician, from contesting elections. Since Khan's imprisonment in August 2023, his supporters held major protests in Pakistan. The latest occurred about 2 weeks ago on November 26. That protest was forcibly dispersed by Pakistan security forces. Now here to discuss these developments with us is Amanullah Tariq. Amanullah is a host on the Eon podcast and is based in Lahore, Pakistan. Thank you so much for joining us today, Amanullah.
Well, thank you for having us on, Dimitri.
So I'd like to start, Amanullah, with the protest that happened on November 26. Apparently there was significant violence on that day. Could you describe to us what we know about the violence?
Before we start with the protest on the 26th, I just want to thank you for having me on and for discussing the issues in Pakistan that we've been facing for the last couple of years. Reason to Resist is a great platform. You know, we watch it all the time. We get a lot of our facts and stories on the Ukraine and Palestine from Dimitri. So huge fans, other than the fact that we've been on. When it comes to the violence on the 26th, this is the unfortunate issue with it because they create a media black hole in Islamabad, which is the capital. We have this very strange culture. I don't know how it'll translate culturally, is that we take shipping containers and we block off main highways. That has been the strategy for most central governments for the past 10, 15 odd years, because as Pakistan has been slowly being open to Western markets, liberalized in the 2000s, and the democratic process has been, ramping up, you've had increasing amounts of opposition protests reaching the capital at many points. So either it would be the PTI, which is the party which has been founded and led by Imran Khan, or the PMLN, which was the then opposition back in the day when Imran was in government and now is in power, would be the civilian collaborators that you mentioned with the state. So we have this culture where you take the national highways, you cut them off with containers, you create physical barriers all the way up to Islamabad, the capital. On the other hand, now we have this added element of social media. So in order to keep a check on it, we allegedly in the last year or 2 years, we have purchased a firewall or some sort of technology from the Chinese. This has been alleged. There's some reports about this. The government has alluded to this, has mentioned it, but then sort of denies it, tiptoes around it, the civilian government at least. The firewall is supposed to function as it's a very strange and unique tool where it can slow down certain media apps, or it can slow down certain processes like sending videos, for example, via WhatsApp, as opposed to sending text. So you'll be able to send a text, but it'll mess up the bandwidth in a way, and I'm not somebody who understands the technology to comment on the nature of it, but I have experienced it firsthand. So there's two kinds of blackouts that will happen. They will not physically allow the regular flow of commercial traffic all the way up to the capital from the main highways that they expect that people will be coming in. Secondly, when they employ the tool, the firewall tool, let's call it, what ends up happening is that it it messes with people's sense of time, in that people will be sending videos that will be 2 hours, before the incident or after a certain incident, and they'll be reaching much later. So it will mess around with the speed and accuracy of the reporting that's happening. State media as well as private media from the mainstream, they were reporting up until the time around, I would say in the afternoon, before things started to get violent, because apparently it did seem like it was unconventional how fast they reached the capital. Basically, that was unconventional. It was unacceptable. Usually security forces would stop you well before the capital, and then well before D-Chowk. D-Chowk is sort of the central place where you have the parliament buildings and the embassies and different lodges for foreign diplomats. It was unbelievable how fast they reached them. The security forces were not violent when they have been violent in the last 2 years. It almost seemed like they were lulling them into a physical trap where they would physically block them off with containers, big shipping containers. And then because there's a media blackout, you can just, you can do as you will. What that did was it allowed for room for the PTI and the opposition to exaggerate the level of violence. In all honesty, the Pakistani military is not very typical of what you would hear in the third world. They've never been confronted with the actual population in too many occasions. So there isn't that history of violence which is direct, which is so direct as to shoot people directly, which is the claims that initially came out. The PTI initially claimed that the death toll went up all the way to like 200, 300, but, and the government, obviously, the civilian government was denying that any, no live ammunition was used. And in fact, it was the protesters who had guns. But I think the truth lies somewhere in between. The protesters were clearly not the aggressors in this situation. They were violent in terms of they were dealing with physical obstacles, whether that be human or some sort of structure that was put in place. But I think the death toll more appropriately would be somewhere around 24 at the max, and minimum a dozen. That would be the actual. And there was some live ammunition used by the Pakistani security forces, primarily the Capitol Police.
And so a report in Al Jazeera at the time said that according to the provincial police chief, Usman Anwar, one police officer was shot and killed, and at least 119 others were injured, and 22 police vehicles were torched in clashes just outside Islamabad and elsewhere in Punjab province. I've had some choice words recently for Al Jazeera, so I don't necessarily take its reporting as accurate on these issues. But
right.
What do we know? Is this fact?
Your grievances with Al Jazeera aside, the report you're specifically talking about is that Al Jazeera offered to speak to the Interior Minister, the Minister for Communication, as well as the Special Advisor to the Prime Minister, who's also a minister, but he's not with any direct department. All three of them refused to speak to Al Jazeera. So if that's any evidence for how confident the state is in the narrative that they're pushing, is that nobody was injured. So it's not a very confident narrative. As far as what they've reported is, it's true. The police members were injured without a doubt. Is there any evidence of protesters having firearms? Not really. The protesters came primarily from the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, which is the province that neighbors Afghanistan. It is a very gun-friendly province. There's a lot of weaponry there. Because the PTI has a regional government still in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, they have full access to the police, to all security apparatus. And I would like to remind you that in the war on terror, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province was the primary sort of stage for the American war of terror. So this is a very militarized police that the PTI government, the local government, controls. If they came in hot, if I was to, use slang to describe it, they wouldn't, kill one or two police officers. This would be a violent coup then. If that is because that is the characterization that they were trying to do. Similarly, a lot of Afghan refugees, like a few million, have lived in Pakistan from time to time, either during the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan or the American occupation of Afghanistan. During both these times, you had a lot of Afghan citizens who were naturalized. So they tend to become a point of contention more often than not, a very racist point of contention by any regime, but this regime in particular, where they try to play off this. And in the initial sort of press conferences, our Minister for Information, who was very insistent, he gathered a lot of international media, and in English he addressed them and described how We had dozens of Afghanis who are not even Pakistani citizens with weapons in the capital. So I think a lot of this is exaggerated and it's not real. I think the security forces wanted to lure them into a trap. They wanted to break up the protesters and maybe capture some of the leadership and sort of break their spirit, because this was the final call, the so-called final call from Imran Khan and the PTI. So they wanted them to lose face, because for the past 2 odd years they've even though they're in the opposition, they're out of power. They've been vilified. They haven't been allowed to run elections. They are growing in popularity. And I think if I had to do a cynical sort of analysis from both sides, from the opposition, they wanted to do a sort of a spectacle for the Trump administration while it was coming in, to create a lot of international noise, which is fair on their part considering the amount of repression they faced in the last 2-3 years. On part of the state, they wanted to keep it as effective, clinical, precise, and then to sort of obfuscate the information after the fact. I would say the state has been more successful than the opposition this time, which is uncharacteristic, because it's not been a very competent government this time around.
I understand that since the 26th, or around the 26th, Imran Khan called for his supporters to resort to forms of civil disobedience. What's that all about? And is this protest movement continuing in some fashion?
I don't think it picked up steam. There was, earlier in about, I think, last year, he had a similar half-hearted sort of call for civil disobedience. The reason is because the Pakistani military apparatus is very deeply entrenched in the Pakistani economy and civil society. In that Pakistan is a tribal society where you will find that people from the lowest sort of economic classes will be connected well up to the top. By maybe 1 or 2 degrees of separation, they will have some tribal or cultural link to someone in a decent position of power. So the people have never been pitted against the state in this fashion. The sentiment is at an all-time high, where people have a mistrust for institutions. This is an international trend. I think it's pretty universal, but in Pakistan, it's a unique phenomenon. The Pakistani military is a very well-respected institution. And this idea that so there's 2 elements of what they've demanded. One element of the civil disobedience looks like not paying your gas and electricity bills. The other element looks like what they've described as boycotting, and I think they've picked up steam, some of it from the BDS movement, which is to boycott any products that have been produced by military-owned industry or adjacent industries. So that could include fertilizer, popcorn, cereals, some tires, some of the energy production is done by the military. It's a very vast and complex sort of situation where you have the military very deeply entrenched in economic functions, and the main sort of target is the DHA, which is the Defense Housing Authority, which is a national authority that functions in major cities of Pakistan. It's basically gated like colonies for like the upper class yuppie types, and they're targeting primarily that. I don't think it's a successful call. I do think there's a sincere sentiment behind it, because the problem with the PTI's protest is that they're half-hearted, because they are always at the end of the day signaling to the military state, because initially, even when the PTI came into government, they did so with the help of the military state. So it's not like their relationship is it's just soured, that's all. It's not a principled sort of stance against the idea of a military state. It's more of an idea of, these aren't the civilian governments that you should have in power. It should be us. And secondly, because the support base is primarily in the Western world, because the the Pakistani diaspora is pretty huge in Europe and in North America. So there's the third call, which is remittances to be stopped. So there's a lot of financial aid that comes in terms of remittances. People pay for their families back home to be, for their upkeep and what have you, or to invest in real estate, which is a primary sort of mode of investment in Pakistan, because we don't have a very well developed financial market, or we don't have commodities or stock market. So a lot of the investment is in real estate. So that's the third thing they've asked for, is for people not to invest in real estate back home or to send money back home. I don't think that's also very successful, because you have a lot of second, third generation immigrants who sustain their families back home, and I don't think they're willing to give that up over the PTI. Even though I would say a significant amount of people have shown a disdain for consuming those products or using military banks or whatever, but I don't think it's something that's going to make a noise.
Right. So, as I mentioned at the outset, Amanullah, the U.S. government was unhappy with Imran Khan's posture towards Russia, and apparently the attitude of the government changed after his ouster. Today, what are relations like between the Russian Federation and Pakistan's government? Has the current government condemned Russia's invasion of Ukraine? Has it sanctioned Russia? Has it assisted Ukraine's war effort in any way?
I mean, Pakistan, I think, is not in no position to sanction anybody. But in terms of but we do have some trade with Russia. We have historical trade with Russia. It's mostly agricultural products. Pakistan's not a heavily industrialized economy. Our relationship with the Russian Federation and the previous Soviet Union has not been great. In the initial days of Pakistan and India went into the sort of the Eastern Axis, as you would call it, and Pakistan swung towards the Western Axis. We had a very decent relationship with the Americans and the Canadians, and of course the British, because of the historical, because we're a Commonwealth country. From the 60s onwards, that relationship soured in the 90s when we developed nuclear weapons, piggybacking off of America. And we pretty much pushed the Indians, there's a particular incident in the 90s called the Kargil incident, where we incited a war in the disputed Kashmir territories. That pushed the more closed India to move towards the West, which you now see with the more populistic sort of governments have been, getting a lot of love from the Obama administration and then from the Biden and the Trump administration as well, in the form of Modi. When we pushed them in the 90s, we pushed them to a wall where they had to capitulate to the West, especially after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Pakistan lost its relationship with the Americans. We got a lease on life after 9/11, basically. 9/11 was the miracle that Pakistan needed to, keep getting its finances from the Americans. But that relationship soured as well, because like with the Soviet war, we had other plans for Afghanistan, we had other plans for Kashmir and for India and the region. Pakistan has primarily always been seen as a containment tool against the Chinese, but the Chinese invested heavily in Pakistan in the past 10, 15 years, especially under the Belt and Road Initiative, which I'm sure that you're fully aware of. The Belt and Road Initiative was, the flagship project of it was supposed to be the CPEC project, which is the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. The Chinese, back in 2014, started investing $62 billion in Pakistan, developing infrastructure, highways, energy production, industrial parks, and the idea was to industrialize some of the more agrarian sources. So like if we are producing a particular kind of fruit or a crop, to then start processing and making value-added products and then exporting it out of the Arabian Gulf. The Pakistan has a big portion of the Makran coast, which is the Arabian Gulf. We have one of the deepest natural seaports, which has never been fully utilized. And the Chinese were hoping to see Pakistan as a potential trading outpost and a defense outpost in the South Arabian Sea, as well as in for the African and the Middle Eastern markets, to make it a transit economy sort of, and a semi-industrial economy. Now we took that money and we developed a significant amount of road infrastructure, railway infrastructure. We're using it today. The electricity that we're using probably right now comes from one of the power plants the Chinese developed. It's nearby. It's a coal plant. It's not clean coal, but it's not nothing. However, it was the Imran Khan has been painted internationally in a lot of media and a lot by the left, I think, as this pro-Russian sort of democratic leader. Imran Khan's regime started to roll back CPEC, for example. The first thing one of the ministers in the Imran Khan government did was he came in, Razak Daud, and he said that a lot of the contracts that we've negotiated with the Chinese are lopsided. Day one, that was the first day of their government. So they had bittered and soured the relationship with the Chinese to a large extent. But at the same time, a lot of the posturing, which was about pan-Islamism, showing sympathy and love towards Iran potentially, and in the UN, Imran Khan gave a pretty like a popular speech in the Muslim world about Islamophobia and how we won't tolerate any blasphemy about the Prophet, peace be upon him, and these sorts of things. But with Russia, it was a new sort of potential start, even though we'd pissed off the Chinese. which is very odd for Pakistan because historically Pakistan, it's willing to risk its relationship with Russia and with other European countries, but never the Chinese for the Americans. The first time we did that was with CPEC, and then Imran Khan's government, when it was toppled, that policy continued. The base assumption is that do civilian governments in Pakistan actually dictate any kind of foreign policy? And the answer is, I think, no. I think what happened with the Russians when Imran Khan went in and talked about gas and oil, potentially trade deals and wheat trade deals, I think that was posturing or an attempt from our state to try to cozy up to Russia and maybe wean off of the American dependence that we have. And it backfired. And I think Imran Khan is the scapegoat fortunately or unfortunately for him, is the scapegoat for it. And I think we've sort of huddled back into a corner because we've been punished economically via the IMF or like I think one of the people we most sympathize is with your countryman Yanis Varoufakis. Is very popular here because we have similar sort of IMF based problems. So Imran Khan and our relationship with Russia, it's hard to say. There is a gas pipeline that we've been negotiating, this idea that we can connect the Central Asian countries all the way into Russia, along with Iran. Iran has recently taken us to International Arbitration Court for a gas pipeline that we've been delaying, which is supposed to go through Pakistan and potentially could go all the way to India. So there's a lot of different, I think, moving parts. I don't think I can confidently say that our relationship with the Chinese or the Russians is ruined. At the same time, it seems like we're looking for the biggest bidder in the potential future, and we're sort of it's sort of a wait and see policy. Our administration was spooked out when Trump was confirmed. They were spooked out by the idea that he's coming in because he's a bit of a troublemaker.
Right. Understatement of the day. So, Iran and Pakistan share a border, and Pakistan is, obviously a predominantly Muslim country. What has the attitude of the current government been towards the genocide in Gaza and the escalating conflict between Israel and the United States on one hand and Iran and its allies in the region on the other?
Pakistan, unfortunately, so historically, Pakistan has always been. So Pakistan, the slogan is Pakistan ka matlab kya, la ilaha illallah, which literally means, what is the meaning of Pakistan? There is no God but Allah. So Pakistan has had a very international, we're all brothers. We're going to work with all 30, 40 odd Muslim countries. It's always postured itself like that and has described itself as an experimental lab for Islamic ideology and political thought. And it's gone through different iterations of that. When we entered the Afghan war, however, under the Musharraf regime, Pakistan developed a new sort of more nationalistic approach where the Musharraf regime came up with Pakistan first. That was their, they were going to make Pakistan great again, if I had to put it in other terms. And since then, Pakistan has sort of shied away from its negotiations and conversations with the larger Muslim world. As an example, the political office that Hamas had, they had an office in Pakistan, was shut down in 2005 while we were engaged in the war on terror against the Americans. And Pakistan tolerated the softer sort of PLO at that time, but our relationship with Hamas and similar organizations did sour. Our classical position on Afghanistan and the Taliban, potentially, that also changed. And that our classical war on the eastern border with India has slowly been shifting to our northwestern border and our western border with Afghanistan and Iran. When it comes to Iran, Pakistan has a sizable Shia population who have very serious, deep sympathies with Iran because of their religious conviction. And Iran has invested heavily in the Shia communities of Pakistan and India, which is a sort of a distinct Shia community from the rest of the Muslim world. But it shares similar beliefs nonetheless. Because of that, Pakistan has a sizable pro-Iran lobby that exists in the state. They're effective in media. They're effective in lobbying the state. Pakistan always respects the minorities in terms of, allowing them their pilgrimages. The Shia community are very well integrated. It's not like a Lebanon or a Syria where these are sort of flashpoints between different religious communities. Pakistan has had a fairly decent track record when it comes to other Muslim countries with minorities. With Iran, however, we have a border that is a problem because on both sides you have the Balochistan and the Balochistan Sistan. These are both neglected provinces in both Pakistan and Iran. Unfortunately, in Pakistan, in Iran, the problem is that the Baloch ethnicity, and they're primarily Sunni. They're a bit of a bother. They don't fit in well with Iranian nationalism or with the religious sentiment in Iran. On the Pakistani side, there's a lot of, it's very deeply complicated issue why the province is underdeveloped. And because of that, there's a lot of cross-border terrorism as well as smuggling. Now, that smuggling is primarily of diesel, which is Irani diesel is very popular in Pakistan. It's primarily smuggled through there, and the military and the security forces benefit from it a lot. So we have a complex relationship. We had an exchange of fire when Iran started engaging the Israelis. The Iranis, when they were bombing different positions in Iraq and Syria as well, they also bombed some positions in Balochistan, and the Pakistani military responded equally. The funny thing about it was they both targeted militia groups, not the actual state apparatus. The Iranis also targeted an extremist Sunni group in Balochistan, which targets the Irani regime. And the Pakistanis targeted a Baloch ethnic, which is sort of a socialist, ethnic, Marxist sort of militia group, which uses the Irani Balochistan to target Pakistan. Again, when we were developing the CPEC route, the Chinese were working with us. The Irani intelligence was used to compromise a lot of the economic opportunities that Pakistan was developing. For example, there was a very famous naval officer, Kulbhushan Yadav, who was an Indian naval officer who had come via Iran with Iranian intelligence help into Pakistan, and he was helping conduct Baloch ethnic nationalists to carry out terrorist attacks against the Chinese. So it's a very complicated relationship. But now the same Iranis are working with the Chinese to develop a bypass for that very Belt and Road Initiative via Afghanistan into Iran, and to use the Chabahar or the Irani side of the Makran coast, which is the South Arabian or Persian Gulf coast, whatever you want to call it. Again, they also have a deep sea port called Chabahar, similar to our Gwadar. So it's a complicated relationship. As far as the greater global conflict is concerned, Pakistan has been a participant. The founder of Pakistan, Quaid-e-Azam, he the very next year in 1948, he sourced weapons from Europe and provided them to the Palestinians. He provided helicopters to the Egyptians to fight the Israelis. Pakistani Air Force is the only air force that has ever downed Israeli fighter jets in the Six-Day Arab War. So Pakistan has had the Pakistani military nuclear program has been directly targeted by the Israelis, either through computer hacks, and as well as through an air bombing campaign that they wanted to do. They wanted to use the British Virgin, this British airline, the one that goes from London to Islamabad. They wanted to use that and fly under the radar of the British Airlines and bomb our North Punjabi, the first facility where we were testing the nuclear program. So Pakistan existentially has a very a relationship of enmity with Israel. However, our foreign policy in the Middle East does fall in tow with the Saudis and the Emiratis, primarily the Saudis, because we see them as the big brother in the Middle East, and they're the sort of we follow, and they fall in line with the Western sort of axis that Pakistan usually is a part of. The Saudis have been normalizing Bashar, so we've been normalizing Bashar. The Saudis have been quiet on Hamas and the Palestinian cause, so we've been quiet on the Hamas and the Palestinian cause. So, for example, I think around the 10th or 11th of October, like a week into the fight last year, we had some major, peace protests, sort of like these rallies for change and to show our support. And Victoria Newman, is that her name, or Victoria Newland? What's her name? The senator in
Newland. Newland, the former.
She called Islamabad, and she shut down one of those protests. That's how much influence that these people have in Islamabad. This government has been particularly bad, although I don't think it's their actual sentiment. I think they just caught up in the wrong time. Classical foreign policy has not been what it is now. Pakistan would have been more vocal. However, like with all things, Pakistan, the government has been tolerating Hamas to operate here. They don't have an official designation. They operate here. They collect charity money for redeveloping Palestine, for housing them. We have a lot of Palestinian refugees in universities. They're totally sponsored by the people. We've been sending aid. We're one of the ones who sent the most aid. And officially, they've sort of, they've dropped the ball without, they'll make tweets or they'll make statements, approaching the UN, becoming a partner to the case for South Africa in the criminal courts and in the ICJ. They've been weak on those things. Initiating something in the uh, in the Muslim Council, they've been weak where they would have been historically strong. But I suspect this is more of a downward trajectory on Pakistan's international relationships with the Muslim countries since the war on terror. It's consistent in terms of that. However, historically, this is not what Pakistan would have done.
Right. Well, let's talk now about Pakistan's relations with the United States. Pakistan's military, I believe this was reported just within the past day, just charged a former spy chief with, quote, engaging in political activities, close quote, in essence, accusing him of working with ex-Prime Minister Imran Khan to destabilize the nation. The charge against the retired lieutenant general, whose name is Faiz Hamid, and he was the former head of Pakistan's Inter-Services Intelligence Agency, or ISI, followed months of investigations and proceeding under the Pakistan Army Act. He was arrested in August of this year, I understand. First of all, this seems like quite an audacious charge for the military to bring, because didn't it itself interfere politically when it helped to remove Imran Khan from power? I mean, is this the charge that one might fairly describe as hypocritical, given the
This is beyond hypocritical. It's to the point where it's irony. It's funny. People are laughing at it. Even the charges like to have political desires or to have political ambition, which is such a hilarious sort of proposition from the Pakistani army. What's very strange about it is that it is unprecedented. This is what I'd like to say. It's unprecedented for a former spy chief, for the ISI, for a military chief, for anyone beyond the rank of, I would say, brigadier general, to be tried and so publicly, not in terms of the actual trial, but the sort of the media cycle of it being so discussed so publicly. We have to take this into some historical account. Now, the military dictator that I mentioned, General Pervez Musharraf, he violated the constitution. He was liable to be tried as a traitor to the country. He was posthumously tried and he was found to be guilty. And the recommendation the judge gave was to hang his body. However, at the same time, he was given a state funeral when he passed away in Dubai in exile in the UAE. And he was brought back and he got a state funeral. His legacy is marred with the killings of thousands of Pakistanis via the drone strikes, because we provided the military and air bases to the Americans. We lost around 100,000 people to the civil war, because a lot of the groups that were sympathetic to the Taliban or the Afghan regime, they rebelled against the Pakistani military, which they had been working with prior to that decision. So, and you had a lot of officers defecting because they didn't want to fight their neighbors, they didn't want to fight Afghanis, they didn't want to fight Muslims. We saw an uptick in racially motivated hatred and politically charged hatred against Afghan refugees, not normalizing them, not giving them citizenship. You had very similar sort of, if you closed your eyes, you could have thought it was some European country, by the way, some of the things that were happening in Pakistan at that time, and still continue to this day when it comes to the Afghani question or the question of our relationship with the Americans. Now, charging a former ISI chief, I think it does show a little bit of the desperation our military has. This is unprecedented in the sense of you've never had a civilian opposition to the military state, whether principled or not, been so obstinate or been so popular. And I think primarily social media has a role to play in this, because people can communicate very effectively now, that they're forced to charge one of their own. Now, Faiz Hamid did enjoy a very good relationship with the PTI management. This much is clear. And initially, when the PTI came into power, they were popular enough where they could have won the popular vote. But I think, the military intelligence did put their thumb on the scale just a little bit for them. And they did enjoy a lot of the control and support via the military state, as well as the intelligence apparatus. That relationship, it seems to have soured it was a mix of, I think, foreign policy as well as domestic dissatisfaction. The Imran regime was not effective at governance. This much was clear. And to be frank, if you asked a PTI supporter, they would have said that, if he keeps continuing like this, we're going to vote him out. And there was increasing dissatisfaction because of the economy and because of governance issues. I think the civilian opposition in Pakistan, the PMLN and the People's Party, and maybe some American interference, forced them to jump the gun and to kick him out when he wasn't unpopular. And he hadn't become unpopular yet. And elements of the military state that remained loyal to him. I think it's just a split between the typical sort of, you would typically expect the military state to fall in line and in tow with, whatever the new policy is. But I think that the previous military chief, General Bajwa, who was hand in glove with the Imran regime until they weren't, I don't think he was effective at managing his boat, and he rocked the boat. And now I think the new military chief has been tasked with this enormous, this mess where he has to try to clean it up. And I don't think he's very effective at it. I think the cat's out of the bag. I think they can't charge. Look, if you look at the protest on the 26th, not a lot of people showed up, but the government was scared to death. I've never seen them like this. I've never seen them shut down the internet completely for days. I've never seen them pay so much money for this firewall thing, and they're doing all kinds of ridiculous, I think they're failing at it. And I think trying a ex-military man like that, I think it's going to set a bad precedent for them. I don't think they've thought this thing through. And I think it's more of a pressurizing tactic, because what they want, so specifically one of the charges is that on the 9th of May, there was an insurrection, which is very similar to what you had in America on the January 5th, what you had with the Trumpers when they went to Washington, and there was a lot of agent provocateurs that were involved in trying to get these people to, and the information has started to come out. Similarly here, you had a complaint from the PTI that, there was agent provocateurs, and they forced the people to break into military installations or to cause chaos. And again, it was a similar tactic where the military sort of backed off and let the people come in. And then when the chaos subsided, identify people via camera technology or whatever. And then I think 2,000 plus people are in jail right now because of that. So they've charged him specifically with that you were one of the inciters and, organizers of that particular protest, even though he was out of office by that time. He was retired from his post. But you can assume that he has enough contacts in the military, and, he has enough resources, human and otherwise, to organize this. Let's say we assume that. Because he's charged with that, and the primary suspect for that is Imran Khan himself, because it was triggered when he was arrested. So I think they want to link this military trial to Imran Khan. And the reason, even though like you mentioned, he's been arrested since August, the reason why they're doing this slow and meticulously is that it gives them time to negotiate with PTI leadership and Imran Khan himself. I think they want a settlement. I don't think they want this thing to get ugly. The last time a civilian government went up against the military state and it became ugly was in the 70s, when a military dictator called Ziaul Haq hung Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, who was the civilian leader, who had been ousted that was more obviously a demand by the Americans, by the way, as opposed to this one. This seems almost like a softer coup, similar to a Maidan situation, this one. That one was a more obvious and apparent coup. The last time it got ugly, Pakistan never really recovered from that. So I don't think they want this to get ugly. I think they want a way out. But it seems like Imran Khan is being tough, and it's because he has a lot of. I don't think any Pakistani leader has had this kind of support in terms of numbers.
Yeah. So since I raised the subject of hypocrisy, I want to talk about the larger hypocrisy of foreign interference. The the Western political discourse, pretty much going all the way back to the 2016 election, in which Trump shocked the world by defeating Hillary Clinton, has been dominated by allegations that Russia is interfering in the so-called democratic processes of Western states, including in particularly the United States. Nobody in the Western so-called mainstream discourse really wants to talk about foreign interference by U.S. and other Western governments in the affairs of non-Western states. Would you agree with me that there has been a long and sordid history of U.S. interference in the domestic politics of Pakistan?
From the very start. When Trump says, I think it was an interview prior to his election, but he'd announced his campaign, and he says that Putin's I think it's Sean Hannity or the other one, the Bill O'Reilly, the other crazy conservative. He says something like, Putin's a killer, and Trump says, we're killers. We kill a lot of people. We got killers over here.
But the way your Trump imitation is extraordinary. Sorry.
So a lot of killers. So that was, I think, there was an endearment even we had with Trump, because we were like, holy shit, this guy's saying it. He's saying the thing, and I think that was what brought people to Trump initially as well. The Americans started interfering in Pakistan in the 60s. One of our early prime ministers was called on for a tour, for a month-long tour of America, and then he was given full state protocol. I think he was provided the one of the air forces, one of the airplanes, Air Force 1, 2, 3, whichever one. Then he was sent to Canada, and they asked one thing of him. There was a particular military officer that they wanted to be promoted in a two-step promotion. A one-step promotion is that you're an exceptional officer, we're going to bump you up in rank. They did a two-step, unprecedented one. That military officer, Ayub Khan, went on to become the first military dictator of Pakistan. So the Americans had pinpointed him out, because what happened was the British apparatus for ruling countries like Pakistan and India, whether that be, aristocratic families, landed gentry that they had given a lot of land or industry to, civil or military bureaucrats that had been trained in British academies. When the Suez happened, after that, all of that shifted to America. So all those human resources across the global south, these families who had been going to the Cambridge since the 1800s or whatever, or the families who had been running the steel for the British Raj, or we make the steel for the railways of the British Raj in Tanzania or whatever. You had such families in India, you had such families in Pakistan. All of them got rerouted to America. All of that apparatus. So whether that be identifying the right kind of civil bureaucrat or the military bureaucrats, that was on the Americans now, and the American intelligence, and primarily the CIA. Our relationship with America soured for the first time when Henry Kissinger. So initially, our relationship with Henry Kissinger was good. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was the prime minister. He mediated the first ever meeting between the Americans and Mao Zedong. We facilitated that. Pakistan did. We flew in Kissinger into Pakistan, and then we flew him into China, and he met with Mao. The same prime minister, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, the relationship soured when he refused to jump into the Afghan war against the Soviets, because he was a bit of a socialist. He did some land reforms. A lot of his power base was in the Marxist socialist trends in South Asia, which we had a lot of in the 60s. And according to legend, the myth is that Henry Kissinger, before he was kicked out of the country, he said to Bhutto, the prime minister, that I'll break your neck, boy. And when he'd left, and when the coup was orchestrated, he hung him by the neck eventually. And Ziaul Haq, the military dictator who came in, killed Bhutto, and in a sort of extrajudicial sort of murder. He was tried by the judiciary, but it was a kangaroo court. Even though I'm not justifying the actions, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was a horrible prime minister, by the way. He was like really bad at it. It was very brutal, very violent. People hated him. That was why there was a support for the new dictator coming in. But there was American intervention, and then Ziaul Haq, the new dictator, jumped into the Afghan war, and we became the premier poster child on fighting a proxy war, and the rest of it, I guess, is history. After that, it soured again when we developed the nuclear weapons. Bill Clinton called the then Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, threatened him with sanctions, offered him up a bunch of stuff. But there was a lot of pressure locally, domestically, and then we did the nuclear tests, and then it soured again. And then it went cold after the Kargil incident, because the Indians, the bigger, much more potent, I think, regional power to keep China in check. That is the goal of the Americans here, by the way. fell into their lap and talked about liberalization and allowing American industry to come in. You have then the Bill Gates types jumping into India. But we got a lease on life with 9/11. We got a lease on life with 9/11. The Americans were our friends again. We opened up more than 60 commercial banks in the span of 10 years. We had, yeah, it's just insane. Where, the interest rates went up like crazy. It was a ridiculous era of decadence in America and Pakistan for that 10, 15 odd year period. That's why a lot of people remember that era again of Musharraf in 2000s as is very great. And, we had a lot of development at that time. But I think we have managed to sour the relationships again. Whether that is Imran Khan going to Russia or the development of the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, I can't say in particular. But it's quite clear that the 7th of October, Hamas, they didn't attack Israel. They killed Archduke Franz Ferdinand or whatever. They've messed with the liberal world order, and Pakistan is trying to figure out its place in all of this. We've historically been with America, but I think we're going to have to rethink it. Unfortunately, a lot of the elite, a lot of the civil military elite is fully invested in the Americas. I'll give you a funny example. So when Imran Khan rolled back some of the CPEC projects, the Chinese projects, the guy they appointed to be the head of the CPEC, his brother had 200 Papa John's pizza franchises in Canada and America. And this guy, this military, it's cartoonish. The joke here started to become, we started calling him General Papa John. That was the meme. And then we found out Papa John is a racist, by the way, which is a separate, I think, unnecessary detail about the Papa John. Great pizza, don't get me wrong, but bad foreign policy. Bad foreign policy.
Right.
What I'm trying to illustrate with that example is that we appoint these people who are financially invested in the Western world. Their kids go to Ivy League schools. Their kids work at the UN or the World Bank or whatever. You know what I'm talking about. When you get a job at one of these things because you know somebody. We celebrate the Queen's birthday now the King, sorry, his birthday in the British Embassy. Anyone in Pakistan in civil society goes there, right? We dress up nice and white and we cut a big goofy cake and we have a little dance. There's a little jig and we're like pickaninnies and we have the black face on. We do the little jig for the white people. So it's very hard to decouple from that. You don't have people doing business in Russia.
Right.
Now, however, in the past 15 years, you have a lot of the people in industry, new money, which is good money in my opinion. I'm not saying it in a negative way. A lot of new money people who are going up in the economic classes, setting up industry, engaged in commerce and trade are turning towards China. China's industrial power has pulled in Pakistani business, without a doubt. We're a fraction of a fraction, but we're not nothing. And that is a glimmer of hope potentially for Pakistan having allies that make more geographical sense. Than America. They make more geographical sense. We've been in a state of civil war. We've had a conflict. I also think Imran Khan's foreign policy affairs were a bigger problem because he refused in a sort of a state-sponsored interview. He was, I don't know, it was CNN or MSNBC or one of these things, where he was asked by some guy trained at Langley or something, one of these CIA, FBI journalists, you know what I mean? And he asks him, will you allow us to have military bases or drones again if we need to, redouble our efforts in Afghanistan? And there's a famous statement where he says, absolutely not, right? That's become sort of iconic in the PTI circles as well. I think that's also a big problem. I think that was the deep state trying to test the waters with the Americans, and I think we got a bad response. Because even the Saudis haven't played ball because we've messed up on three things. Two of them were from the previous government, and one of them was Imran Khan. Imran Khan messed up on the drone stuff and the Russian government and the Ukraine war. The Nawaz Sharif government messed up on CPEC and Yemen. We refused to go to Yemen, which was one of the things. Classically, Pakistan's military was utilized always in Middle Eastern conflicts as training apparatus or to provide human resources or whatever. So I think we've made 3 or 4 mistakes in foreign policy in terms of pissing off the Americans. That's what I think it is.
Right. So I'd like to conclude with a weighty question about, you mentioned several times the fact that Pakistan developed a nuclear arsenal. Since the genocide in Gaza began in October of last year, there has been considerable concern about the possibility that if that war escalated, Israel would strike Iran with a nuclear weapon, one or more nuclear weapons. And I've seen suggestions. I'm not going to quote anybody because I can't remember exactly where I heard them, but on several occasions during the past year or so, I've seen suggestions in social media and on some independent political analysis programs that there's been a warning somehow communicated by Pakistan to Israel that if Israel uses a nuclear weapon on Iran, Pakistan would retaliate against Israel with a nuclear weapon. I've never seen any evidence to back this up. And so I'm just curious, am I correct that there is no known evidence to back up this threat?
There is no known evidence to back that claim up. I think it's more of a fantasy. Unfortunately, with the axis of resistance, some of this stuff is just, it's Twitter nonsense. Right. Or X, whatever, X, whatever you call it. However, in terms of Pakistan's actual nuclear doctrine, it is pretty violent. Pakistan does have a second strike capability, number one. Number two, have the Israelis ever tried to mess with our nuclear program? The answer is yes. And have we thwarted the Israelis? The answer is also yes. Have we directly engaged the Israeli Air Force and won? Yes, with American F-16s and what have you. Again, it's funny, on both sides you have these American planes and we won over them. Would you say that would it be in Pakistan's best interest to use nuclear deterrence? I think yes. Any sort of fallout from Iran would come onto Pakistan as well. And how cynical these sorts of affairs are in foreign policy. One of the big threats that Pakistan has is on the Persian Gulf that will blow up the oil trade for the world. One of them is Paris. The other one is London. We can reach all these places and we can reach Israel. So is it within the realm of possibility? Yes. Has it been communicated in any way whatsoever? No. I don't think the Pakistani apparatus is preempting any sort of strike from the Israelis. And I think a lot of it is Israeli posturing. Are they nuclear capable? Without a doubt. I have no doubt in my mind. Maybe 10 years ago I would have. I think there is no doubt at this point. You have all these people like Scott Ritter, all these military experts who actually know about armament. They can confirm and Israelis have confirmed pretty much they have nuclear capabilities. Whether or not they can strike Israel and then would Pakistan retaliate, there's no evidence to show this. Will it fall in line with Pakistani nuclear policy? Yes. We have second strike capability. We developed it for a reason. Iran, with all of its flaws, is our neighbor, is somebody leading one of the fights against Israel and oppression in the Middle East. And Pakistan, I think historically, I don't think Pakistan could take the kind of pressure. We have a sizable Shia population and a sizable Sunni population that is standing alongside Iran and the Palestinian people. So I don't think any kind of nuclear attack would be tolerated. Call this wishful thinking, but there's no tangible evidence for this, but it would be definitely a part of Pakistani doctrine. Mm-hmm. The problem with that, however, is that Israel has a bargaining chip against Pakistan, which is India. India, the current regime, has been very cooperative with the Israelis. Historically, again, the more socialist type or the more liberal regimes in India, they had posturing towards the idea of a Palestine, but I think it was posturing. Their trade and military relationship has always been solid. It's ramped up in the recent years. You see a lot of Israeli military tactics being used in occupied Kashmir by India. You see a lot of the military technology being employed by India there as well. Again, like we all know, Palestine is like a testing ground for Israeli military technology and intelligence apparatus, and then all of it is exported to third world countries. The Saudis buy it, the Indians buy it. Even the Pakistanis have bought some stuff. By the way, we bought Pegasus. Don't quote me, but we did. But you can quote me, clearly. This is the podcast. But so would Pakistan retaliate with nuclear force? Maybe. Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Why not?
Well, let's hope it doesn't come to that, to say the least. So, Amanullah, thank you. It's been a great pleasure talking to you. Very, very enlightening for me.
You.
I hope we can
thank
continue.
You so much for your time. Thanks. I mean, again, I think I did a bad job at simplifying. I think if people can just listen to the opening introduction that you gave, I think that's enough for them. Don't listen to this podcast. Forget you ever heard any of this.
I hope they do listen to the podcast, because I learned a great deal from our conversation today.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I mean, we can all hope and pray for the situation in Palestine, in Syria, and the one in Pakistan. And we can all hope that, Donald Trump delivers on what he's been promising. Although I think it's suspect. I think he's more of a institutional Republican this time. I mean, he didn't really shake up things last time either, but this time I think he's going to be worse. So we can hope and pray for the best. Thank you very much, Dimitri, for giving Pakistan the time of day.
Thank you. My pleasure. And this is
we will
Dimitri
sacrifice our life for Dimitri.
Never
I'm sure you've
that.
seen the thing. I'm sure you've seen the thing, right? The Pakistan, it's
Absolutely.
a famous meme.
I love Pakistan. I will sacrifice my life for Pakistan.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Pakistan's goofy like that. We're not a serious people.
It's been, again, a great pleasure talking to you, Amanullah, and we'll continue the conversation in the future. And,
thank you very much, sir.
This is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you for Reason to Resist from Montreal, Canada on December 11th, 2024.